Hartford Hart Williams stepped out of the transport van and into a world of frost and wonder. The ice hotel loomed before him, ethereal and otherworldly, its crystalline walls glowing faintly under the Arctic twilight. The towering structure, carved entirely from ice, reflected the dim sunlight in a kaleidoscope of blues and whites, a frozen masterpiece of artistry and engineering. Hart had seen pictures online, read the travel blogs, watched the videos, but none of it compared to the surreal reality of standing here in person. "It's smaller than I expected," someone murmured behind him, their voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around their face. Hart disagreed. The ice hotel seemed enormous to him, less like a building, more like a cathedral, raised in worship of the cold itself. The sheer grandeur of it made his breath catch, though that might also have been the biting chill of the Arctic air. He pulled his parka tighter around himself and took a deep breath, the frosty vapor curling in front of his face. "Welcome to the Ice Hotel," the cheery voice broke through the silence. A tall man with curly hair and an easy grin waved from the entrance. "I'm Larry, your ice concierge for the week. Trust me, you're gonna love it here." A group of guests shuffled towards the doors, their boots crunching over the snow-covered pathway. As Hart approached the entrance, he felt a pang of unease that he couldn't quite place. The hotel's icy facade seemed to shift under the pale light, as though the carved walls were breathing, subtly expanding and contracting. He blinked, and the feeling was gone. Inside the ice hotel was a revelation. The lobby stretched high above him. Its vaulted ceilings shimmered with light from an enormous chandelier made entirely of ice. The floors were polished to a mirror-like finish, reflecting the intricate sculptures that lined the walls. Towering over the entrance was a massive elephant head, carved from a single block of ice, its trunk curling gracefully towards the floor. The tusks gleamed, smooth and sharp, while the eyes, dark glinting gemstones, seemed to follow him as he passed. "This," Larry said, spreading his arms theatrically, "is the heart of the Ice Hotel. Every year we rebuild it from scratch. Artists from around the globe come here to design and carve these sculptures. Every detail you see is unique to this season." Hart moved deeper into the lobby, marveling at the artistry. Along one wall, a row of frozen trees stretched their branches, each leaf etched with such precision it looked ready to fall. Near the entrance to a hallway stood a life-sized wolf, poised mid-stride, its eyes fierce and glinting with predatory intent. The sculptures were beautiful, but there was something about them, something too alive, that made Hart uneasy. "Wow," a woman beside him murmured. "It's like walking into another world." Hart turned to see her smiling at him. She was mid-30s, with dark hair tucked under a knit hat and a friendly warmth in her eyes. "First time here?" she asked. Yeah, Hart replied, still taking in the surreal surroundings. It's a lot to take in." His mind flashed to his father's funeral 5 weeks prior. The smell of heavy and burdening sorrow was stuffed into sachets that lined each and every church pew, made more prominent by a sea of black clothing, tears. The man we had all gathered for, once a booming captain of industry, now lay in the middle of rows of flowers, withered, like a tiny bee who had suffocated itself in pollen. That same smell had followed him into the probate attorney's office, where he was presented a letter from his father to be given to him in the event of his passing. "Dear Hartford, you have brought so much joy to your mother and I, and we couldn't be prouder. I've tried to teach you many things, but sadly one lesson was missed. I divided my entire estate between you and your sister on the request that you live your life better than I did mine. Fall in love, go places, see the world while you can, because whether you realize it or not, you've been building your bucket list for most of your life. Use this money to clear that list. As I've proven today, you only live... The woman chuckled, her laughter dissipating his thoughts. No kidding. I'm Patrice, by the way. Hart, he said, shaking her gloved hand. Hart Williams. They exchanged pleasantries as Larry called out names and handed out room keys. Patrice explained that she was visiting the Ice Hotel as a way of using her newly divorced husband's money to achieve a dream they had together. I figured why not? Life's short. I didn't need him to enjoy this. She shrugged. There was a hint of something unspoken in her voice, a sadness she tried to mask with a bright smile. Soon, Larry led them down a winding hallway lined with ice carvings, explaining the hotel's layout and amenities as they walked. When they reached Hart's suite, he stopped in his tracks, stunned. The room was an Arctic dreamscape. Frosted trees grew from the walls, their branches arching overhead to form a frozen canopy. The bed, carved from a single block of ice, was covered in thick reindeer hides and heavy blankets, the only splash of warmth in the otherwise glacial room. Larry handed him the key with a grin. Don't worry, it's warmer than it looks. Those hides will keep you cozy. Just don't lick the walls, okay? Hart laughed despite himself, watching as Larry moved on to the next room. He set down his bag and ran a hand over the hides. The contrast between the cold, hard ice and the softness of the blankets was oddly satisfying. Exhausted from the journey, he slipped under the covers that night and was surprised by how quickly he warmed up. His sleep was deep, though not entirely peaceful. He dreamed of frozen forests, stretching endlessly to a dark horizon. Shadowy figures moved among the trees, their eyes glinting like stars as they watched him. He felt no fear, only a strange, quiet acceptance, as if the icy world was drawing him in. By morning, he awoke feeling oddly refreshed, though the memory of those eyes lingering in his mind like fragments of forgotten thought. The next day dawned pale and cold, the faint Arctic sun casting long shadows over the hotel. Hart spent the morning exploring the Ice Hotel's many wonders. Each suite was a work of art, with themes ranging from fairy tales to abstract designs. One room was styled as a frozen ocean, its walls carved with waves and schools of fish that seemed to shimmer in the light. Another was a winter palace, complete with a throne sculpted from ice. The corridors twisted and turned, making the hotel feel much larger than it had seemed from the outside. Hart marveled at the artistry, but found himself disoriented at times. The hallways blending together in a maze of frosted walls. He joined the other guests in the lounge for lunch, where they gathered around a bar carved entirely from ice. Crystal-clear glasses clinked against the smooth surface as Larry served cocktails and joked with the group. "Can you believe this place?" Patrice asked, sliding onto the stool beside him. She looked more relaxed than she had the day before, her cheeks pink from the cold. "It's been like a dream." Hart nodded, sipping his drink. "Yeah, I can't shake the feeling that it's watching us." Patrice raised an eyebrow and laughed softly. "The hotel? Maybe." Hart grinned sheepishly. "I mean, look at these sculptures. They're too perfect. It's like they're alive." Patrice glanced at the wolf statue in the corner, its icy gaze fixed and unblinking. "I see what you mean," she said, lowering her voice. "It's a little unsettling." Larry joined them, his usual bright demeanor in full force. "Don't let the sculptures scare you," he said, overhearing their conversation. "This place is magic, sure, but it's a good kind of magic. People come here to escape, to find something special, and it always delivers." His words lingered in Hart's mind long after lunch. That night, as he lay in bed beneath the glowing ice canopy, he thought about what Larry had said. The hotel did feel magical, but not in the way that Larry described. It felt alive, like it was watching, waiting. His dreams were more vivid this time. He walked through an endless maze of icy corridors, the walls shifting around him as he moved. The shadowy figures from before were closer now. Their eyes gleamed like cold fire. They whispered, their voices soft and urgent. But he couldn't understand the words. Hart awoke to a pale gray light filtering through the frosted window of his suite. The faint glow made the icy canopy above his bed glisten as if the frozen branches were alive. He lay there for a moment, cocooned in warmth, listening to the faint whistle of the wind outside. But as he stirred, the wind grew louder, angrier. By the time he reached the window, it howled with a force that rattled the panes. Outside, the world was white, the horizon swallowed in a torrent of swirling snow. The storm had arrived, erasing the edges of the landscape and wrapping the ice hotel in a cocoon of isolation. It was as though the storm had sealed them off from the world, leaving only the hotel and whatever lay inside it. By mid-afternoon, the guests had gathered in the ballroom. Their laughter and conversation echoed off the smooth ice walls. Hart found himself lingering near the bar, nursing a vodka chilled to perfection in a glass car from frozen water. The chandeliers overhead sparkled, refracting light that danced across the walls in shimmering patterns. "Now, this storm's no joke," said a guest nearby, a burly man in a heavy sweater. "They're saying it could last all night." "It's a good thing we're here, not out there," Patrice said, her voice light but her gaze distracted. She sat beside Hart, stirring her drink absently. "It's like the hotel was built for this, isn't it? Sanctuary." Hart glanced at her, catching the unease in her tone. Before he could respond, the ballroom doors swung open and a woman stumbled inside, her face as pale as the snow outside. She clutched the frame of the doorway, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "The view," she said, her voice trembling. "It changed." The room fell silent. "What do you mean?" Larry asked, stepping forward, his ever-present grin faltering. "I don't know how to explain it," the woman stammered. It's not the same. It's wrong." Curiosity prickled through the group. Larry offered her a calming smile, though it looked strained. "I'm sure it's just the storm playing tricks," he said, "but let's have a look." Hart followed Larry and a handful of guests as they made their way towards the woman's suite. The corridor was dim, the light from the chandeliers overhead flickering slightly as if the hotel itself were holding its breath. By the time they reached her room, Hart felt a cold weight settle in his chest, heavier than the icy air. The woman gestured to the window with a trembling hand. "It was flat yesterday, just snow, but now, look." Hart peered out, his breath fogging the frosted glass. The storm had cleared just enough to reveal a jagged cliff edge, mere feet from the building. Below, an abyss yawned, black, infinite, as if the earth itself had been swallowed whole. "Jesus," someone muttered behind him. "That wasn't there before," the woman said, her voice rising. "It wasn't!" The air in the room felt tight, as though the walls were pressing inward. Hart stepped back, his pulse pounding. Larry, hesitant, then forced a cheery laugh. "It's just the wind shifting the snowdrifts," he said. "Optical illusions and all that." But Hart didn't buy it. He could feel the truth creeping in. Cold, undeniable. The hotel was moving. One of the braver guests, a wiry man in his 40s, muttered something about checking it out. Before anyone could stop him, he threw on his coat and slipped out through the back exit. Hart caught a glimpse of him as he neared the cliff, his boots crunching in the ice. Be careful," Larry called, his voice taut with strain. The man crouched near the edge, peering into the darkness below. He turned back towards the group, waving as if to say it was fine. And then the ice beneath him cracked. The sound was deafening, echoing through the frozen air. Hart's breath caught as the man's arms flailed, his mouth opening in a silent scream. For a moment he hung there, teetering on the edge, and then he was gone. Swallowed by the void. Someone screamed. Hart couldn't move, his feet rooted to the floor as the ice at the edge of the cliff glistened red where the man had fallen. The storm roared as if in approval. Larry clapped his hands, his voice forced and bright. "Everyone inside! Come on now, no need to stand out here!" Hart didn't need to be told twice. As he followed the group back into the safety of the hotel, he couldn't shake the feeling that the building itself was watching, its walls tightening around them like a frozen predator, closing in on its prey. The next morning, the storm showed no signs of letting up. Hart woke to an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint thrum of wind outside. The light filtering through his window was dim and gray, giving the room an eerie glow. He dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway, which felt colder than before. The air was sharp, biting, and the walls seemed to shimmer in a faint pulse, as though the ice itself was alive. He walked cautiously, his footsteps echoing, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive quiet. The day passed in a blur of tension. The guests gathered in clusters, whispering amongst themselves. Larry, ever the optimist, did his best to maintain morale, organizing games in the lounge and handing out drinks with his usual charm. But Hart could see the strain in his face. The man who had fallen was never mentioned. Patrice sat quietly in the corner, staring at the chandelier overhead. When Hart approached, she gave him a faint smile, but it was fragile, as though it might shatter at the slightest touch. "I don't like this," she admitted, her voice low. "The storm, the cliff, this place." "It's just a storm," Hart said, though he didn't believe it himself. "We'll be fine." Patrice glanced at him, her eyes dark. "Feels like the walls are closing in. Like the hotel is alive." Her words sent a shiver down his spine, but before he could respond, a loud crack echoed through the room. The guests froze as the chandelier overhead trembled, tiny shards of ice falling like glass rain, and then it happened. The stalactite, a massive shard of ice, broke free from the ceiling, plunging down with a deafening crash. It struck Larry where he stood, piercing his chest, pinning him to the floor. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure shock, his eyes wide and unseeing as blood seeped across the icy surface. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt thick, suffocating. And then the screams began. That night, Hart lay awake in his room. The reindeer hides pulled tightly around him. The hotel felt different now. It's quiet. No longer comforting, but oppressive, as though it were waiting. The walls seemed to pulse faintly like a heartbeat, and he thought he could hear whispers in the darkness. When sleep finally came, it was restless. He dreamed of endless hallways that twisted and turned, their walls slick with ice that pulsed under his touch. Shadowy figures lurked at the edges of his vision, watching him, their eyes glowing faintly. He woke drenched in sweat, the whispers still echoing in his ears. When he stepped into the hallway, his heart stopped. The corridor was littered with bodies, naked, pale, lifeless. They lay sprawled across the ice in grotesque positions, their faces frozen in expressions of terror, their limbs were twisted unnaturally, as though they had been broken and reassembled. The smell of blood hung in the air, sharp and metallic, and the walls seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. Hart's stomach churned as his eyes fell on Patrice. She lay among the dead, her arms outstretched as if reaching for help that had never come. Her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. Her mouth frozen in a silent scream. His knees buckled and he fell to the floor, bile rising in his throat, and for a moment he couldn't move, he couldn't think. The walls seemed to lean in around him, and the faint thrum of the pulse grew louder, echoing in his ears. The hotel was alive. And it was feeding. Hart remained frozen in the hallway, his breathing fogging the frigid air as his mind struggled to process the scene before him. The bodies, the blood, the way their pale, contorted forms seemed to merge with the icy floor as if the hotel itself had claimed them. His eyes locked onto Patrice's lifeless body, her expression frozen in an unbearable mix of terror and pleading. She had reached for help for him, and he hadn't been there. The faint sound of the wind outside mingled with the unsettling stillness of the corridor. The flickering light from the ice sconces cast distorted shadows on the walls, making the scene feel like a macabre painting come to life. Hart's stomach churned as he forced himself to turn away, steadying himself against the cold wall. The ice beneath his hand vibrated faintly, not from the storm outside, but from something deeper. A rhythmic thrum that seemed to pulse through the structure. A heartbeat. Hart jerked his hand back, his breathing quickening. He staggered down the corridor, his boots slipping on the smooth ice as he put as much distance as he could between himself and the gruesome tableau. The pulse in the walls seemed to follow him. A steady rhythm that grew louder the further he went. The air grew colder, sharper, biting at his exposed skin. He rounded a corner and leaned heavily against the wall, his breath coming in gasps that crystallized in the freezing air. The hallway stretched endlessly before him. Or had it always been this long? He wasn't sure anymore. The layout of the hotel, once charmingly labyrinthian, now seemed malicious, shifting around him like a living maze. His hands trembled as he pressed them to his temples, trying to steady his thoughts. "It's not real," he whispered, his voice sounding weak and small in the icy silence. "It's just not real." But deep down, he knew it was. The rest of the hotel seemed abandoned. He stumbled through the corridor, calling out, his voice echoing off the ice walls. No one answered. The guests and staff had either vanished or joined the bodies in the hallway outside his room. He passed through the lounge, the dining hall, even the ballroom, each space eerily untouched, as though the horror outside hadn't reached them. Yet the oppressive atmosphere lingered, pressing down on him like a suffocating weight. In the ballroom, the chandeliers above flickered faintly. Hart paused beneath one, staring up at its frozen splendor. He thought about Larry, his cheerful optimism extinguished in an instant by the falling stalactite. The image of Larry's lifeless body, blood pooling around him, flashed through Hart's mind, and he shuddered. The whispers began then. Faint at first, barely distinguishable from the soft hum of the ice, but growing louder with each step he took. Words he couldn't understand layered over each other in a cacophony of hushed tones. He spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing, only the shimmering walls and the faint pulse that had become impossible to ignore. And then he saw it. At the far end of the ballroom, a door he hadn't noticed before. It was seamless, almost indistinguishable from the wall around it, but it pulsed faintly with a soft blue light. The whispers grew louder as he approached, and he hesitated, his hand hovering over the icy surface. Part of him screamed to turn back, to run as far and as fast as he could, but there was nowhere else to go. Nowhere to hide. The hotel wouldn't let him. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. The chamber beyond was vast, its walls glowing with an eerie, translucent light. Hart stepped inside, the temperature dropping instantly, the air sharp and heavy. The ice beneath his feet was smooth, almost glass-like. And as he looked down, he saw something moving beneath the surface. Veins. Dark, pulsing veins stretched across the floor, branching out and weaving through the walls like a living circulatory system. They pulsed in time with a rhythmic thrum that he'd heard, each beat sending a ripple of energy through the room. The glow intensified, illuminating the chamber with a sickly blue light. And Hart felt a wave of nausea roll over him. This wasn't a hotel. This had never been a hotel. It was alive. The whispers crescendoed, filling the chamber, and Hart clutched his head, stumbling forward. His breath fogged the air as his vision blurred. The light around him bending and twisting. The walls seemed to move, the veins contracting and expanding like lungs, inhaling and exhaling. And then, from the far corner of the chamber, something stirred. A figure emerged from the shadows, its skeletal frame coated in frost and ice. Its limbs were twisted, impossibly long and jagged, its hollow eyes glowing faintly with a cold, malevolent light. It moved towards him slowly, its steps uneven, its body creaking with every motion. Hart stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest, as the creature raised a claw-like hand, its fingers curling and uncurling with eerie precision. "Stay back!" Hart shouted, his voice cracking. He reached for something, anything, but his hands found only the smooth, unyielding ice. The creature paused, tilting its head as if studying him. Its hollow eyes burned into his. And Hart felt his knees weaken. The whispers grew, deafening. And for a moment, he thought he could understand them. They weren't just voices, they were the hotel speaking through the ice, through the walls, through the veins that pulsed beneath him. They were calling for him. The chamber pulsed again, and Hart's vision wavered. He dropped to his knees, clutching at his chest, as the cold seeped into him, deeper than skin, deeper than bone. He could feel the hotel's hunger, its ancient cosmic need. The creature took another step forward, its clawed hand outstretched. And Hart understood. This was no sanctuary. It was a trap. The Ice Hotel was a living entity, an ancient being that fed on blood and souls, drawing its victims into its frozen embrace and consuming them one by one. And he was next. The chamber throbbed, a rhythmic pulse so loud now that it seemed to reverberate through Hart's very bones. The veins beneath the ice glowed a deep, sickly blue, radiating an energy that was both hypnotic and terrifying. The skeletal creature moved closer, its frost-covered body emitting a faint crackling sound with every step. Hart scrambled back to his hands and knees, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps that crystallized in the freezing air. His mind raced, every nerve screaming for him to flee. But his body refused to obey. The whispers, louder now, filled his ears with overlapping, unintangible words. They weren't just sounds, they were pulling him in, compelling him forward, towards the creature and the pulsing veins that seemed to be waiting for him. "No," he choked out, shaking his head. "This can't be real." But it was. The whispers reached a fever pitch as the creature knelt in front of him, its hollow eyes fixed on his. It raised a clawed hand, brushing it lightly against his face. The ice burned like fire, and Hart cried out, falling back. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, as it leaned closer, its mouth open in a soundless scream, its breathing a freezing gale that tore at his skin. The hotel was alive, and it was hungry. Hart staggered to his feet, his legs trembling. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" The whispers softened, merging into a single voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Deep, resonant, and ancient, it filled the chamber with a chilling authority. "Sacrifice," it intoned. The word echoed, twisting through the icy walls like a living thing. "Blood, souls, you." The veins beneath his feet pulsed brighter, and Hart felt the heat drain from his body. His knees buckled and he collapsed, his hands pressing against the ice as though trying to ground himself, but the ice beneath him wasn't solid anymore. It was alive, shifting and rippling under his touch like flesh. "This can't be happening," he whispered, his voice shaking. "It's a building. It's just a building." The entity's voice responded, cold and unrelenting. "This form is what you see. I choose for you to see. I am older than this ice, older than the stars above. You are my sustenance, my offering." The chamber seemed to shrink around him. the walls leaning in as the pulsing veins grew brighter. He could feel the hotel feeding off of his fear, drawing strength from his desperation. It wanted more. It wanted everything. Hart's mind raced. Fragments of the past few days flashed before him. The other guests, Patrice, Larry, the bodies in the hallway, they'd all been part of this, chosen by the hotel to feed its endless hunger. He saw Patrice's face again, her eyes wide and terrified, and guilt twisted in his stomach. He hadn't saved her. He hadn't saved anyone. "I won't let you take me," Hart said, his voice barely above a whisper, but even as he spoke, he knew it was futile. The hotel had chosen him. It had been waiting for this moment, biding its time, and there was no escaping its grasp. The creature reached for him again, its skeletal fingers closing around his wrist with a grip like frozen iron. It pulled him towards the center of the chamber, where the veins converged into a massive, glowing heart embedded in the ice. The pulse was deafening now, each beat vibrating through the air like a drum. Hart's breath caught as the heart began to glow brighter, its light enveloping him. "Your fear strengthens me," the voice said, resonating through the chamber. "Your blood completes me." Hart's mind reeled as he fought against the creature's grip, but it was impossibly strong. He was dragged to the heart, the icy veins wrapping around his ankles and wrists like living chains. The cold seeped into his skin, spreading through his body like poison, and he cried out as his strength faded. The ice beneath him softened, giving way as the veins tightened their hold. He could feel his life draining away, siphoning into the glowing heart. The whispers returned. Softer now, almost soothing, as if the hotel were thanking him for his sacrifice. Hart's vision blurred. The edges of the chamber faded into black. The whispers slowed, their urgency fading, and he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. His thoughts drifted to Patrice, to Larry, to the others who had come before him. He wondered if they'd felt the same peace before the end. The pulsing heart grew brighter, its rhythm steady and strong as Hart's body sank deeper into the ice. The hotel fed, its hunger sated. For now. As the Arctic sun rose, the ice hotel began to dissolve. The walls cracked and melted. The sculptures collapsed into pools of crystal clear water. The bodies, the whispers, the creature, all of it disappeared, leaving only an empty stretch of snow and ice where the hotel had once stood. The storm faded and the landscape returned to its quiet stillness. But deep beneath the frozen earth, the ancient entity lingered, dormant but not gone. It waited patiently, biding its time until the next travelers stumbled into its frozen domain, drawn by promises of beauty and wonder. The ice hotel would rise again, and it would feed. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I know I haven't had as many updates as I would like to have on the channel lately, and things just kind of get really hard with shit that's happening in my family. But hey, I wanted to say thank you so much for being around. Thank you so much for still supporting me and for coming back to listen to new stories. If you guys want to get updates anytime that I do upload, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Or if you're listening over a podcast, I think it's still a subscribe button or a follow button or whatever happen, those happen to be. As always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody out there on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. A very, very big thank you to everybody there, and to especially Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, King Crab, Calcifer420, Veronica Lynn Lopez, Marlon Chavez, Azazel66603, Ethan Leon, Polaris Prospect X, Blake Rattler, Viceroy Scorn, Samara Lynn, Disciple, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna Crow, LaQueda, Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jed's Pet, Clonable, J Kearns, Mike, himbojerry, CrusaderChocobo, Remember the Sun, Estebean, Hour Minute Second Time, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Voice of Sand, Ficomel, Melted Lake, Tully Sue, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Tommy Walters, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Tristan Pelton, Ball Arms the Rat, The Ginger Bros, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kinchin. To all of you guys there, everybody who's down in the description, and everybody who can just give $1, I want to say thank you to you guys. And if you would like to join this list in the description, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepy. And if you would like to join this list in the description, sweet dreams.